All right, so we're going to do Reconstruction. This is up on your blackboard now. This is the time period immediately following the Civil War, 1865 to 1877, roughly, okay? I will tell you that historians, we always try and put things in eras and time periods, and we look for nice, neat little places to drop things, but nothing's neat in history. You're going to feel the effects of Reconstruction all the way up into the 1960s. Some people have Reconstruction ending in 1898, but 1877 is a pretty good date for us, and it's the date the state of Texas wants you to use. So we're going to use 1865, the end of the Civil War, to 1877, the election of Rutherford B. Hayes, for our time period. Why do we call it Reconstruction? Well, if you think about it, we had torn our nation apart during this time period. The Civil War had destroyed everything, particularly in the South. Sherman had torn up the trains. We had burned the city of Atlanta. Large parts of the South were just completely destroyed. The plantation system was gone. Slaves had been freed. Large parts of the population were dead. There's nobody to work the farms. It is a bad, bad time period, North and South, but especially in the South where they lost the Civil War. Well, now we have to reconstruct the nation. It literally means rebuild the nation, okay? So let's look at exactly what we did in this time period. In 1864, right as the Civil War is winding down, the Wade-Davis bill is introduced. Remember, Abraham Lincoln is still president at this time. And the Wade-Davis bill said that for Southern states to be readmitted to the Union with all the rights and privileges of their sister states or member states, I guess it's more politically correct now than sister states, that the first thing that happens is 50% of all white males must swear an oath of allegiance, an oath of loyalty. The term we usually use is oath of allegiance. It's just a promise to be loyal to the Union, a promise never to rise up in rebellion against the Union again. At the point that 50% of the people swear this, then and only then, the state, or the territory by this point, could call a constitutional convention. And they're going to redraft a constitution that meets all of the new requirements. For instance, they have to abolish slavery. Slavery has to be gone. That's one of the requirements. They have to put something in their Constitution that says that secession is illegal. Remember the word secession? If you don't know that word, you must know it. To secede means to leave the Union. Secession is the act of leaving the Union. You have to put in your Constitution that it is illegal for your state to secede from the Union. And third, it had to disqualify all former Confederate officials from holding public office. All right? So if you were a governor or a lieutenant governor, a congressman, or even if you were a high-ranking military officer, you were disbarred. You were not allowed to seek office. Well, that all makes sense to me. I look at that and I go, fine, abolish slavery. That's great. I support that. Refuse secession, well, I don't know about that, but okay, that was the cause of the war. That makes sense. We're going to disqualify these. That makes sense. But what have you in fact done when you do this? You've said all the people in the South with any experience in politics or government cannot run for office. So you're going to have a nation of amateurs with no idea how to run your country running it. That's not good. You're going to abolish slavery, but you're not going to put anything in its place. Remember, the whole economy of the South is based on cotton and tobacco, mostly cotton by this point. And that's based on slavery. If you take that out, what's going to happen to the economy of the South? It's going to collapse, and you're going to create a third world nation inside the United States. Finally, states were required to give blacks the right to vote. This turns the world upside down. Think about it. If you're a former Confederate, you'd been a plantation owner or you'd been an official in the Confederacy. In 1864, you were at the top of the heap. By 1865, sometimes you didn't get the right to vote, you couldn't hold office, your economy was collapsed, and your former slaves now can run for office and can vote. The world has turned upside down again. Because this was so harsh, and I don't know that any of it was wrong, but it was so fast, so harsh, Abraham Lincoln would not sign the legislation. He wouldn't pass it. He vetoed it. Wade Davis bill doesn't become law. It's too strict. So what are we going to do instead? If I go too fast, y'all let me know. Let's look at what we do. We end up breaking it down into a few small parts. December 6, 1865, we passed the first of the 3 Reconstruction Amendments. The 13th Amendment. The Reconstruction Amendments are 13, 14, and 15. Okay? The 13th Amendment outlawed slavery throughout the nation. It said slavery is illegal. Neither slavery nor involuntary servitude, except as punishment for crime, whereof the party shall have been duly convicted, shall exist within the United States or any place subject to their jurisdiction. What that means is you can't be forced to work against your will unless you're in a work camp in prison. If you've been convicted of a crime, you can't. By the way, this has created a lot of problems for us throughout history, because think about it. Y'all ever heard of the draft, where they, time of war comes and they draft you into the military and you have to go serve? Does that violate the 13th Amendment?
Yes.
Is that involuntary servitude? Well, the court has ruled it doesn't. There's an exception for that. But strictly speaking, you know, I think it does. Okay? So the 13th Amendment frees the slaves. I will tell you that we thought that was going to solve the whole problem. The North, they said, that does it, we freed the slaves. Everybody's equal now. But Southerners are sneaky, slimy creatures. I know because I be one. Okay? And yes, I said that grammatically incorrect because I'm making fun of the Southerners. And we said, fine, they're free, but they're not citizens. That amendment doesn't say anywhere on it that I have to make former slave citizens. It just says they can't be slaves. So we said, fine, free, not citizens. So then Congress gets back together and they go, we got to fix that. There seems to be a loophole there. And that loophole was, they're not citizens, so how do we give them the right to vote? The law says that you've got to be a citizen to vote. Okay, well, Well, it's not up here yet. It's going to be in a few minutes. We're going to fix that with the 14th Amendment, and we'll get to that in a few minutes. So, what exactly is this Reconstruction? That, by the way, is an actual photograph of a war-torn Atlanta, to give you an idea of what things look like. And to give you an idea of how bad it was, Atlanta was the largest, richest, most important city in the South. Its nickname was Terminus, because all the railroads met in Atlanta. If you went anywhere, you had to go through Atlanta. I think that's still true today. It's their airport now. You ever fly anywhere, you got to fly through Atlanta. I'm pretty sure that when I die, before I go see St. Peter, I'm going to have a layover in Atlanta. All right? It's always been that way. Super important. And we have got to rebuild this. But the problems that we have with this are dramatic. First off, what do you do with the freedmen? Freedmen it just means freed men, freed slaves, former slaves. What do you do with these people? It would be entirely unfair just to let them loose on society. Why? Well, they're not educated for it. In most of the southern states, it was illegal to teach your slaves to read and write. Now, a lot of them learned anyway. But you want to take somebody that's never managed money, never really managed his or her own life because they've been told what to do their whole life, can't read or write, and say, congratulations, you're free, go make it in the world. If any of you have younger brothers or sisters, it would be like you taking your 10-year-old brother or sister and saying, we've had enough of you, go out in the world and make a living for yourself. All right? I'm 47 and I have a hard time with that. So, think about how hard that is. The next problem is, who's going to be in charge? Who's going to be in control of Reconstruction activity? Because the federal government is going to spend a lot of money rebuilding the South. And that's tax money. And that tax money is not going to come from the South because they don't have any money. We've destroyed everything. It's going to be northern tax dollars being spent in the South. And they're going to demand that they have some say over it. So will it be Congress that determines it? Will it be the president that determines it? Will it be the military governors that determine it? What's it going to take to readmit them? We've already seen Wade Davis has failed. 50% is not going to work. How do we keep the plantation system in place without slavery? Well, they're going to discover something called sharecropping. And it's going to work pretty well. And how do we rebuild this infrastructure? All of these things are going to cause massive problems. And Abraham Lincoln is going to be the person that has to deal with it. He's the President of the United States from 1861 to 1865. He serves the entire time of the Civil War. He is re-elected during the Civil War. But he doesn't get to enjoy his victory long. On April 9 of 1865, Lee surrenders to Grant at Appomattox Courthouse. That was in our last lecture. April 9, 1865. A few days later, April 14, 1865, Abraham Lincoln decides to take his wife out, Mary Todd Lincoln, to the theater. By the way, he invites General Grant along with him. And General Grant was supposed to come with him, but his wife fell ill and he backed out. So, could have been much worse. They go to Ford's Theater right down the road from the White House. Still there, by the way. There's a reserved spot for the president all the time. And they go see the play Our American Cousin. It was the blockbuster of the season. It was the Hamilton of that time period. Okay. And Lincoln is in a weird place. He's just won the war. And the abolitionists in the North love him. And the Southerners have promised to kill him. He's in serious danger. He's already survived one assassination attempt. He was, about a month earlier, he was out writing. Now, this is the time period before the president had all the Secret Service agents they have now. He was out writing by himself in Washington, and a bullet went through his hat. So he's already survived one assassination attempt. And now we're going to get to know this guy, John Wilkes Booth. John Wilkes Booth was one of the most famous actors in the world. He was from a family of actors. Think of the Baldwin brothers, okay? He's like all these brothers that are all actors together. And they were all these great Shakespearean actors. Well, while he wasn't in the play Our American Cousin, he was familiar to everybody there. And he was a celebrity. I mean, think about it. You think if Brad Pitt showed up at the theater that somebody would tell him he couldn't come in? He's a celebrity. He's known. Well, that would be what this is like. He's also a Virginian, and he blames Abraham Lincoln for the destruction of the South, and rightfully so. He comes in the back door at the theater entrance, makes his way down the hallway, up the stairs, and he finds the president's balcony seat unguarded. There's a lot of questions as to why it was unguarded. Most historians accept the position. There was a guard that was supposed to be at that curtain or door into the balcony, and he said that he had moved his chair over so he could watch the play. So he moved his chair over so he could look out at the play, basically leaving the door unguarded. Besides, it's John Wilkes Booth. Who's worried about him? John Wilkes Booth walks up there. He opens the doors of the balcony seat, or opens the curtains, lowers a derringer to the base of the president's head, fires a shot into the back of the president. And because he's an actor and a bit of a, is drama queen a bad term here? A bit of a drama queen. He doesn't escape in the traditional way. He doesn't sneak out the back. He leaps from the balcony, landing on the stage, and he yells the words, "Sic semper tyrannis." It's Latin for "thus always to tyrants." What he means is, if you abuse your power, if you're a tyrant, you deserve to die. And the audience stood up and applauded because they thought it was part of the show. They didn't understand what was happening for minutes. By the way, he broke his ankle when he landed on the stage, and he stumbles off, finds his horse out the back, and escapes. The biggest manhunt in American history happens. They find him right across the river in, I believe it was in Maryland by this point. May have been Virginia, I don't remember. But they find him right across the river, hiding out in a warehouse. And the military ends up burning the warehouse to the ground with John Wilkes Booth in it. He never stands trial. Led to a lot of mysteries. A lot of people believed at the time that John Wilkes Booth survived. In fact, there was a guy right here in East Texas, a place called Mixon, Texas, a few years ago, well, about 100 years ago, that claimed to be John Wilkes Booth on his deathbed and said that he'd escaped. There's no evidence of that, but it's interesting. By the way, John Wilkes Booth was not alone. That's the part we always teach you. There were actually 3 assassins. What was supposed to happen was Booth would kill the president, and then his two co-conspirators were going to kill the vice president and the Secretary of State all at the same time. Why would you want to do that? Well, because our Constitution used to say, if the president dies, the vice president takes over. If the vice president dies, the Secretary of State takes over. And it didn't say anything after that. And they thought that if they killed all 3, the government would just collapse. They were literally trying to collapse the government and restart the Civil War. But The guy that was supposed to kill Vice President Andrew Johnson went and got drunk instead. And the guy that was supposed to kill Secretary of State Stanton actually did show up. He showed up at the house, knocked on the door, and Stanton's son answered it. And he claimed to be a delivery boy delivering Stanton's medicines. The son sent him upstairs to Edwin Stanton, who was sick in bed. And when he went in, he tried to smother Edwin Stanton with a pillow. But the son walked in on him and beat him until the police arrived. Those two co-conspirators and the lady who owned the hotel, the house that they planned it in, were all hung for the attempted assassination attempt on Lincoln. John Wilkes Booth was killed in the fire. I bring all that up to kind of show you what the world was like. Lincoln was not a popular man. This is a cartoon, and it may be hard for y'all to see it, but that's Abraham Lincoln walking a balance beam with an African American on his shoulders. I've seen that political cartoon show up on the STAR test before, so I put it up here. The idea here is that Lincoln is trying to walk this delicate balance of not making any side mad and still get the African American rights, okay? It's a powerful, powerful cartoon. Before Lincoln died, he put his own plan in place. It's called the 10% plan, sometimes called presidential reconstruction. Write that down somewhere, that this is presidential reconstruction. Lincoln was a better man than I am. That shouldn't be hard to do. Because before he died, even though he had fought this war, and by the way, lost a son in the war, he didn't want to punish the South. He wanted to fix the nation as fast as possible. His plan was about forgiveness, did not want to make things hard on the South. He wanted to pardon all of the Confederate officials, all those guys. As soon as they swore an oath of allegiance and swore never to do anything again, he was just going to pardon them for their crimes. That's a big deal. Because the crime they committed was treason. And according to our federal laws, the punishment for treason is death by hanging or death by firing squad. By the way, that's still in our federal laws. The punishment for treason is death. And he wanted to forgive them. He was even going to allow former Confederate officers to be representatives in Congress. All they had to do is 10% of the white male population had to swear an oath of allegiance. 10%. And everybody's forgiven. Now I'm going to put that in perspective for you. If you stepped out in the hallway of your school right now, walked down the hallway and 10 guys jumped you and just beat the tar out of you, and then you ran to your principal or whoever and you said, hey, these 10 guys beat me up, and he said, it's okay, one of them apologized. So we're going to forgive all of them. Would you be happy? No. What about the other 9, right? Well, that's the way the Northerners felt. Lincoln is willing to forgive 100% of the population when 10% said they're sorry. Imagine what you would feel like if you were a Northerner and your father or your brother or your son had fought in that war and maybe died in that war, and now Lincoln is saying the people that were responsible for that, 10% of them said they were sorry. That's tough. I don't think I could be that good of a man. Okay? The other thing that the Presidential Reconstruction puts in place is the Freedmen's Bureau. And it's going to exist from 1865 to 1869. This was the first major relief agency in the history of the United States. Its sole purpose was to help freed slaves adjust to a new life. Great organization. They came down south, they did stuff like they built schools, they built churches, they registered blacks to vote once they have the right. They built hospitals. They're doing all this great stuff to help the freedmen. And they are hated by the South. Hated. Check out this cartoon. One of the most racist cartoons I've ever seen. The Freedmen's Bureau. An agency to keep the Negro in idleness at the expense of the white man. This is the image they have of blacks in the South. Idle, not working. And in their minds, since slavery is illegal, these blacks were just laying around collecting a government paycheck. Now that's not at all what was happening, but that's what they thought was happening, and they were willing to blame the Freedmen's Bureau for it. The response to the Freedmen's Bureau is Southern Confederates are going to form an organization of their own. The Knights of the Ku Klux Klan. Okay? This is all going to come out of this. So, what are the issues? Slaves need land to support themselves. Where is this land going to come from? Well, they go back to this guy, Thaddeus Stevens. We'll talk about him a little later, but Thaddeus Stevens was a congressman, and he once said that when this great war was over, every slave will be given 40 acres and a mule. What he meant by that was we would take these vast plantations and we would carve them up and we would give that land to the slaves. So we're going to take the land away from the white landowners that owned it and redistribute it out to their former slaves. You can imagine that's not going to be popular in the South. By the way, that was never a law. That never passed. That was just an idea. So what are they going to do? They want to seize this land. Others in the South argued, you can't do this. We have a right to property. Remember the Constitution. Life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness is a paraphrasing of life, liberty, and property. We have a right to own property. You cannot take my property without due process of law. This is taking property without due process of law. So presidential reconstruction is not going to be successful. So we're going to come up with another plan. It's called congressional reconstruction. This is Congress's plan, sometimes called radical reconstruction. Write that down somewhere, that congressional reconstruction is sometimes called radical reconstruction. In 1864, the same year that Lincoln is re-elected President of the United States, the radical Republicans captured both houses of Congress. Now, if you don't know what the word radical is, in politics, a radical is somebody that's on the fringes of belief. It's somebody that's oftentimes willing to use violence and punish their enemies. Well, why would the radicals take control? Well, think about it. All those southern states where the Democrats had lived, they didn't get to vote. They had seceded from the Union, and they had not been allowed back in yet. So Congress is completely controlled by radical, abolitionist Northern Republicans. And they're not happy with Lincoln's plan. It's too generous. They want to punish the South. Their plan is to treat the South like a defeated enemy in war, which is what we were. Like it or not, Confederates, Southerners have to admit, we lost that war. We were a defeated nation, and these guys want to use the federal government to change the social architecture of the South, to make the rights of slaves, former slaves, more important, and frankly, the rights of former Confederates less important. So what are their main goals? First off, they want to prevent the Confederate leaders from returning to power. Above all else, they do not want those former Confederate officers back in power. Second, they want the Republican Party to grow in the South. Before the Civil War, there was not a Republican at any elected state or federal level in the South. You could not win an election in the South if you were a Republican. Everybody was a Democrat. By the way, that's going to stay true in most of the South all the way up until 1980, when Ronald Reagan changes that. But they want to build this Republican Party. One of the ways they can do that is they can give freedmen the right to vote. Because, think about it, who do you think the blacks are going to vote for, Republicans or Democrats? At this time period, the Republicans were the party of Lincoln. They were the party that had fought a civil war to end slavery. The Democrats were the party that were trying to keep slavery. The blacks were going to vote Republican. And by the way, they'll continue. The African American vote will vote Republican all the way up until Franklin Roosevelt in the 1930s. Okay? So it's going to be a long period that they're going to be a Republican mainstay. Smaller goals for the South. They wanted the South to get rid of the plantations and instead have small farms and let people be kind of yeoman farmers like they were in the North. Grow your family crops, grow enough food for your family, maybe sell a little bit, but get rid of this plantation idea. They wanted to build free schools, mostly because the South was way behind in education. Remember I told y'all last semester in the South, our kids were stupid and we wanted to keep them that way? We didn't build public schools. Because if our kids got educated, they may not stay and work on the farm with us. Well, they want to fix that. And they want equality for all our citizens. That's a big, big demand. Well, they want equality for all our male citizens. Even these guys weren't ready to give women the right to vote yet. That's not going to happen until the 20th century. This guy, Thaddeus Stevens, he's the one we talked about a minute ago with 40 acres and a mule. Thaddeus Stevens is the leader of these radical Republicans. He was a Pennsylvania congressman, and he is the guy that most wants to punish the South for what they did. Guys, if I go too fast, y'all please tell me. Here's a quote from him. "We have turned or are about to turn loose 4 million slaves without a hut to shelter them or a cent in their pockets. If we leave them to the legislation of their masters, we had better have left them in bondage." You don't have to write the sentences. I used to do that in class. I've got it up there. But it's important to think about it. This guy is saying that if we don't help the freedmen get established, if we don't educate them and build schools for them and get them on land with property, if we don't get them registered to vote, we might as well have left them in slavery because it'll be as bad. And he's right. He's right. At least I believe he was right. 1866, we passed the first Civil Rights Act. Anyone born inside the borders of the United States, except for Native Americans, anyone born inside the borders, except for the American Indian, the Native American, would be guaranteed citizenship. That's pretty cool. Kind of funny the people that were here first aren't granted it, but it also said that African Americans would be allowed to own property, and they could use the court system. Here's what's important about it. If anybody violated this, they could be sued in court. And the Civil Rights Act is still important today. This has been the basis of a lot of our legislation. In fact, in the 1960s, in the Civil Rights Movement, which we'll get into at the end of this semester, they're going to base a lot of their beliefs on this act from 1866. You need to know the Civil Rights Act. Pretty important. I promise it'll be in your first test. All right. Now to the second of the Reconstruction Amendments. Remember I told you the 13th Amendment freed the slaves. But in the South we went, fine, they're free, but they're not citizens. Well, Congress got together and Congress said, we can fix that. We'll pass a 14th Amendment. The 14th Amendment granted citizenship, and this is a quote, to all persons born or naturalized in the United States. And this would include former slaves. So now they've solved it. 13th said you're free, 14th said you're citizens. What are you going to do about that? And remember, Southerners, we are sneaky, slimy creatures, right? Well, we created a new subclass. We said, yes, they're free, yes, they're citizens, but they are non-voting citizens. That never existed before. So what's going to happen? Well, they're going to have to go do a 15th Amendment. They kept thinking that what they had done was going to solve all the issues, and we kept finding ways around it. 14th Amendment. Nor shall any state deprive any person of life, liberty, or property without due process of law, nor deny to any person within its jurisdiction the equal protection of the laws. In other words, you have all the rights of citizenship if you're born here or naturalized here. Okay? Super, super important. 14th Amendment is probably the most quoted amendment in Supreme Court cases in the 20th century. President Johnson, Andrew Johnson is now president because Lincoln was assassinated. He vetoes the Civil Rights Act. This is going to make Republicans mad. I want to talk to you about Johnson a little bit. Andrew Johnson is almost always listed as one of the worst presidents we ever had. He didn't do well. He's the only president in history to actually be formally impeached. Now, he wasn't convicted, but he was formally impeached. How does this guy become president? He's a weird character. Remember, Lincoln was a Republican. Johnson had been a Democrat his whole life. Johnson was a Southerner. He'd been a senator from Tennessee. But when the Civil War broke out and all the Southerners left and went to the Confederacy, Johnson was the sole Southerner who chose not to leave. Now, he believed in slavery. He believed in states' rights. He believed in almost everything the Confederates believed in. But he did not believe in secession. He thought the Union should be preserved. So he chose not to leave. He stayed a loyal member of the Senate and continued to serve as a senator all the way through the Civil War, even though his state had left the Union. As a result, in 1864, when Lincoln sought re-election, he dumped Hannibal Hamlin, his first vice president, and he picked this guy Johnson. So Johnson switched to the Republican Party to run with Lincoln. The Republicans hate him because he used to be a Democrat, and he was a pro-slavery guy. And now that the South wants to come back in, Johnson sticks with Lincoln's plan. He says, no, we shouldn't punish them. We should allow them back. And he is very sympathetic to the South. Lincoln can get away with this. Johnson can't. So the radical Republicans are going to start plotting against Johnson. How can we get rid of this guy? I'm going to skip this because we've already talked about it. So what are they going to do? The radical Republicans are going to pass the Military Reconstruction Act, which wiped out presidential Reconstruction. It just shut it all off. All of Lincoln and Johnson's programs are gone. Instead, it's going to divide the whole South, with the exception of Tennessee, because Tennessee was mostly loyal, into 5 military districts. And instead of having a governor run the states, a general would run it. That was appointed by Congress. By the way, the guy that ran Texas was a young man named General George Armstrong Custer, and he hated Texas. He famously said, and I love this quote, because Texans, we kind of like it when nobody else likes us. He famously said that if he owned hell and Texas, he would live in hell and rent out Texas. Okay? He was out in West Texas. He didn't much care for our state. You can imagine the South is not going to like military reconstruction. It's martial law. The military is acting as the police force. There were curfews. You couldn't be out at all after dark. You couldn't congregate in large amounts. A lot of the rules that had previously been put on blacks with the black codes are now being put on whites. So what are they going to do? They're going to say, fine, here's our plan. You want to be readmitted to the Union? You've got to design the Constitution. You've got to give suffrage to all adult males, regardless of race, and you have to ratify the 14th Amendment. That's fair. That's fair. By the way, that word suffrage means the right to vote. We've talked about it before. You need to know the word suffrage, okay? It does not mean to suffer. It means the right to vote. Suffrage, the right to vote. So, we got a war now. We have the radical Republicans against their own president, Andrew Johnson. And these two guys are going to be the two that take him on. Edward Stanton, the Secretary of War, that's the guy that was one of the ones that was being suffocated in the assassination attempts. And Ulysses S. Grant, the head of the Army. The guy that defeated Lee, the guy that won the Civil War. And these two guys need to find some way to weaken President Johnson. So they passed the Tenure of Office Act. Now, I'm no fan of Andrew Johnson. But I got to tell you, I've got some respect for how Johnson responded to this. The Tenure of Office Act, passed in 1868, said that the president, any orders the president gave to the Army had to first go through Army's headquarters. And second, that if the president wanted to remove an official, they had to get the approval of the Senate first. Well, Johnson disagrees. Johnson vetoes this act. Because there was a reason for this. Edward Stanton was a spy in his midst. And Johnson wanted to fire him. Because he would go to the cabinet meetings, listen to Johnson, and then run over and tell Johnson's enemies what he was doing. Here's the problem with this law. The Constitution cannot be violated by law. You cannot pass a law in violation of the Constitution. And the Constitution says, one, that the President is the Commander-in-Chief of the military. That means the President leads the military. He's the guy that tells them what to do. Now, he can't declare war. That's given to Congress. But once it's declared, the President sets the agenda. So the first part of that all of his orders have to go through Army headquarters, clearly unconstitutional. And Johnson says so. He says, I'm not signing it. It's illegal. The second part, the Constitution says that the President has the power of appointment and removal. So this says you can't remove anybody without the Senate's approval. He says, nope, that's also unconstitutional. I have the power of appointment and removal. If I can appoint them, I can fire them. And he's right. And he knows that this is unpopular, and he knows it's going to get him in trouble. In fact, Stanton comes to him and says, if you veto this bill, we will impeach you. We will remove you from office, and you will be damaged for all of history. And Johnson says, do it. I can respect him for this. There is nothing else he's ever done that I can respect him for. Terrible person in so many ways. But for this act, he was very, very respectful. So what does he do? He fires Stanton. He removes 4 commanders from the Southern Military District. And he says, now I did it. I violated your order. What are you going to do about it? And they impeach him. They bring him up on trial. And this was a circus. That's a ticket right there to go see the impeachment of the president. It was like going to a movie. You get a ticket and go watch it. He was charged with high crimes and misdemeanors. He was violating the rules and attempting to undermine Reconstruction. And the votes look like he's going to lose. The trial goes pretty quick. Within a few days, it's over. But he is ultimately found innocent by 1 vote. He was 1 vote shy of being impeached. And it wasn't because the person thought he was innocent. They said that the person, in fact it was Stanton that talks about it, says that while I believe he is guilty of these crimes, it would set a dangerous precedent to impeach a president simply because I don't agree with you. So he is saved from removal by 1 vote. And by the way, to this day, we've never